Jimmy Butler getting traded? Could it be the Warriors? Maybe it's the Suns, or even the Dallas Mavericks. Let's dive into how realistic it is for any of these teams to even get him. Shout out to Keith Smith, he's the one who broke it down. As you can see, Jimmy's contract, he has 2 years left, and next year he has a player option. We have heard rumors that Jimmy wants an extension, but that's not really relevant right now. As for the Miami Heat, you can see they are $13.9 million over the luxury tax, $9.2 million over the first apron, and $1.6 million under the second apron. So why is that important? Well, they are not hard capped at either of the tax aprons. But what this means is they can actually aggregate salaries in a deal, which some of the other teams cannot, spoiler alert. As long as the result stays under the second tax apron, they're fine. But because they are already over the first tax apron, they cannot take in more salary than they're giving out, which is kind of an issue. If they did somehow take back more salary, that would trigger a first apron hard cap, which obviously they don't want. But first we'll start with the Phoenix Suns. We know the Suns, their payroll is crazy, and as you can see here, they are $31.5 million over the second tax apron. So that means Phoenix cannot aggregate salaries in a deal, which is why I said even though Miami can earlier, other teams cannot. So any deal that they made would have to be Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, or Kevin Durant. And obviously we know they're not trading Kevin Durant. Well, maybe in the future, but not for Jimmy Butler. And they're not going to trade Devin Booker. So then obviously it's going to be Bradley Beal as the odd man out. But here's the issue. Every one of those players make more than Jimmy Butler does. We just discussed how Miami cannot take back more money than they send out. The Suns also can't take back more salary than they send out, which makes it so tricky. But this is the proposed trade where they can actually both get it done. Miami gets Bradley Beal. The Phoenix Suns get Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson. Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson make less than Bradley Beal, so Miami is in the clear there, as he said. Bad news for Miami. They would trigger a second apron hard cap, but because they are under by $3.3 million, they would have enough to fill out their roster because you need 14 players at the minimum on standard contracts. What makes this work is Josh Richardson's acquired via the minimum exception. As for this being a good deal for Miami, absolutely not. I don't think this is a good deal for Miami. Strike one. And it's nothing against Bradley Beal, but Bradley Beal is at the tail end of his prime. Some may say he's even past his prime. But the point is, if Miami, in my opinion, is going to make a trade, they're not trading for someone who's further past their prime than Jimmy Butler is. Unless that player literally basically makes them the favorite to win a championship, but that's not the case here. Obviously, you always want young talent, but I think they would be okay with trading for someone who's in Bam Adebayo's age range because that is in the midst of their prime. And then they could also, have a couple of years to work with. To trade for a player of Bradley Beal's age, again, nothing against Bradley Beal, but it just doesn't make sense for Miami. So I don't see this happening at all. For the Phoenix Suns, I think this is a pretty good trade. Like, you're basically saying, can Jimmy Butler make us better than Bradley Beal? Because it's just a swap, essentially. And we know Jimmy Butler shows up in the playoffs. He does his thing, so I think this is an okay trade for Phoenix, but I just don't see Miami doing it. Then we go to the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks are hard capped at the first apron because of the Klay Thompson sign and trade. They are also only 300 and some change under the first apron, which makes it super difficult. But just like Miami, Dallas doesn't have any aggregate restrictions, so that makes it a little bit easier. So the proposed trade is Miami gets Daniel Gafford, Quentin Grimes, Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, and PJ Washington. And the Mavericks get Jimmy Butler. You might be like, hey, wait a minute, Jimmy Butler makes more than those players combined, so how can they take back more money? Well, that is because PJ Washington has a $500,000 incentive in his deal. So when he gets traded, that goes with him. But the issue here is, and again, this is why this trade is not really realistic at all, but Dallas would only be under the first apron by $228,917. You know what the problem is? They gave up so many players, and we talked about earlier, you have to have, at the minimum, 14 players on a standard contract. Well, we know a veteran minimum is, $1 million and some change or whatever it is. $228,000 is not enough to fill 3 roster spots. So there definitely is a way to make it work with Dallas, like probably a 3-team deal or whatever, but it's too complicated. Like, it's just too much work and it doesn't make much sense. It doesn't really make sense for either team. Like, I guess Miami's getting a bunch of players back, right? But they're not getting a star back at the moment. And granted, PJ Washington, very good player. Daniel Gafford, if you watch this page, if you've been here for a while, you know I've been talking about for years how Daniel Gafford is underrated. But they have Bam Adebayo. They don't need Daniel Gafford. And again, for Dallas, it doesn't really work for them. I don't know that Jimmy Butler even fits their style of play, so To me, this is a no for both teams. And now we go to the final team, the one that everyone is saying is most likely the Golden State Warriors. I talked about it maybe like a month ago, and I was saying if Jimmy Butler went to the Warriors, depending on what they had to give up, I felt like they could be a contender. Let me just say, I've been high on the Warriors. If you watch this page, you know I've been saying before the season started, I think this team is nice. They've had a rough patch here, but I still think this team is better than people give them credit for. And I think this team can compete. But obviously, if you can add Jimmy Butler, and again, not have to give up too much, it could be even better. They want another on-ball creator, obviously to ease the burden off Steph and Draymond, which was supposed to be DeAnthony Melton, but unfortunately he got hurt. I don't know if you watched a lot of Warriors games this year, because DeAnthony Melton didn't play a ton before he got hurt. When DeAnthony Melton played, they were so good, and DeAnthony Melton was the perfect fit. He was exactly what they needed and wanted. Someone who can, obviously create his own shot if he needs to, someone who can handle the ball, and a very good defender. Let's talk about how realistic this actually can be. The Warriors are hard capped at the first apron, and they only have $533,000 and some change to make some moves. If you want to know how tough it is already for the Warriors, you can see on the bottom, they can't even fill their 15th roster spot because they don't have enough space for even a prorated minimum. The good news is both sides can aggregate salaries, but again, the margins, it's really tough. Like, they don't have a lot of money to work with. So this is the proposed trade. Miami gets Kuminga, DeAnthony Melton, Andrew Wiggins, and a top 55 protected second-round pick. You might be thinking, where did that pick come from? Well, as you could see here, you put an extra player on Miami's side, it's not legal for Golden State. And the same thing vice versa. So they had to add in the Detroit Pistons as a third-team facilitator. So the Warriors get Jimmy Butler, and Gary Payton II actually goes to the Pistons. So as you can see here, it works because the Heat are taking back $2 million less than they are sending out. Although the Warriors gave a bunch of players in the deal, they will have $7 million to work with, which is enough to get to that 14-player minimum. We know Detroit has cap space, so obviously that's why they could take on GP2's salary. Miami would have to waive a player, though, in order to make this work. And then the last thing is, because Miami and Detroit have to connect to satisfy the touch rules in a multi-team trade, the Pistons are sending the Heat a top 55 protected pick. So do we really think this trade makes sense for the Warriors or the Heat? In my opinion, this is also a no. That's why this Jimmy Butler trade is so much more complicated than you think, because the new CBA makes it difficult to make trades, and his salary is large, and it's just really complicated. Like I said, I like Jimmy on the Warriors. I think he's a good fit. He is someone who will show up in the playoffs. We know this. Playoff Jimmy. His toughness, his defense. I like everything that he brings to the table for the Warriors. Just like I think he would be a good fit on the Phoenix Suns. Brings the toughness, the defense. Like I said earlier, I thought it was an okay deal for the Phoenix Suns. But I think the Warriors are giving up way too much in this deal in order to make it work with Jimmy Butler. Not only are you giving up Kuminga, which if you watch this page, you know I'm a huge fan of Kuminga. I think he's a future perennial all-star. That's just my opinion. But besides that, you give up Andrew Wiggins. Obviously, you have to make the salaries work. But Andrew Wiggins is playing like 2022 all-star Wiggins. And then you're also giving up Gary Payton II, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated players in the league. What he does for that team, you can't trade him. I don't think you can trade Kuminga either, but I don't think you could trade GP2. But for the Warriors, I would say this is a no. For Miami though, this is a nice deal. Out of the three, this is the best deal for Miami. Why? Because Andrew Wiggins is around the same timeline as Bam Adebayo, and like we said, he is playing some of the best basketball of his career again. So you can be relevant with Bam, Andrew Wiggins, and Tyler Hero. Those three are nice together. And then the star of the deal is Jonathan Kuminga, who, if he turned out to be, again, what I think he's going to be, then Miami has a young 21, 22-year-old who can literally be a perennial all-star. That's a pretty good return for Jimmy Butler in his situation. So if the Warriors want to do that deal, then Miami better say yes. But if I'm the Warriors, I'm not doing that deal.